All right, let's wrap up chapter 23 here with the French Baroque. And so France remains a Catholic country, and we will see here the focus on royal patronage, specifically under the guise of King Louis XIV. This is Rigaud's portrait of Louis, and Rigaud is one of the most important portrait painters during Louis's reign. He gives us these kind of grand presentations of the king who ruled France from 1643 to 1715. This is still today one of the longest rules of any European monarch. He was called the Sun King, S-U-N, because he saw himself as the center of the universe. This is a guy with a very healthy ego. He anchored his rule in divine right. He said, he received his authority from God, and he believed that he was the incarnation of the Sun King, Apollo. This is part of the Baroque era theory called the theory of the divine right of kings, which advocates the divine origin and lack of any sort of restraint of monarchical rule. Louis continued his predecessor's work of creating a centralized state governed from the capital, governed by a king who had unlimited power. And we see that power on display here. Louis is displayed in his coronation robes that are this kind of deep, almost royal blue, royal purple, with this gold leaf pattern. This is the fleur de lis. This is a national symbol of France. And actually, Louis said, I am the state. For him, the king and France are one and the same. He's shown here with a sword, crown, and scepter in this very lush, decadent environment. He also, look at his gaze. His eyelids are down. He is looking down on us. We are clearly not on the same plane as the king. And this painting acted as a kind of substitute for the king. It hung over his throne, and attendants could not turn their back to the painting, just as they would never turn their back to the king himself. So here we see a really powerful combination of art and politics. Louis also completed a vast building campaign at Versailles, which had been the royal kind of hunting grounds outside of the city, but he decides he wants his court, he wants all of the other aristocrats to move out to Versailles. It was a way to keep tabs on people. Louis was kind of a paranoid micromanager, and he didn't want anybody to be doing anything in Paris without him knowing. If they move out to the sticks, then he knows he can keep better track of people. And he rebuilds the palace, expands it out so that it includes 700 rooms, 67 staircases, and thousands of works of art. And I think the most famous room by far is the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. This is, it's a long hallway that connects the private apartments of the king that are on one end to the apartments of the queen that are on the other end. And we see these 17 mirror-clad arches on the one side of the wall that reflect the light pouring in from these 17 arch windows on the other side. This is the setting that Louis used for opulent parties. He loved costume balls, masquerades, festivals. Versailles became the stage for him to impress aristocrats. And I think we're already getting the taste here of this kind of no holds barred spending, this kind of decadence, while the 99% lived in squalor. This can't last for long. People become upset. People realize the abuses of the king, and this is what leads to the French Revolution in the 18th century that's coming in the next chapter. All right, so it's not just the palace itself, it's this huge garden as well, acres and acres, where Louis transformed an entire forest into a manicured park. There's different axes. We can see one here, and this is just from a slightly elevated view here. These axes that create optimum views of the palace and the landscape, including series of fountains, sculptural groupings, reflected pools. There's topiaries and clipped hedges. All of this is with the idea of that the king is so powerful that even nature bends to his whims. Look at this huge pond here. This is indeed an artificial lake constructed for Louis, and this was also the site. These gardens were used in his fancy parties, and something that Louis liked to organize to impress his friends were mock sea battles. And so these mock sea battles would take place here on the Grand Canal below. Now you guys are going to read about what life was like at the court of Louis XIV in Versailles in your primary document reading by the Duc de Saint-Simon this week. And the Duke is writing this as a memoir. He was at the court, but he's writing this 30 years after the fact, kind of looking back at this time. And you're going to want to pay attention to how is the king described, what life was like at Versailles, and connect it back to the architecture that we see here. How does the architecture of Versailles reflect the ideals and observations of the Duke of Saint-Simon? And we also want to be aware here of any sort of criticisms or any sort of negative feeling we might be picking up on from our author about King Louis. All right, that is it for chapter 23. Make sure you are reading the textbook. These are small bite-sized mini lectures. They cannot replace the textbook. You are always reading the textbook in conjunction with this. And of course, you're reading the primary documents as well. Please get in touch if you have any questions, and I hope you're doing well.